Seeing Channing Tatum fight a lizard in some cathedral was where my space operatic obsession skyrocketed. You're telling me you can be aesthetically varied and unrestricted without a need to make total sense as long as it's in the name of fun? Extra points if it's not ugly? Guess whose career got defined by doing exactly that? Every night I dream of the reality where the Wachowski sisters got to direct two conceptually rich trilogies, the second one being that 2015 cult classic flop divided into three films for me to better relish in this exhaustive love letter to science fiction. Jupiter Ascending was made in a lab designed according to my aesthetic weaknesses, most of them instilled by the Wachowski sisters themselves. I was made the perfect target, but the toxic relationship I share with JA is me paying the price for ignoring the many red flags in the form of trailers relying a bit too much on spectacle to sell on AP, or lofty lines delivered ever so apathetically by a supporting cast. Didn't care. Steampunk moonscapes were happening. Shout out to Iron Head Studios. I thought it was either you were a sci-fi fan or not, but the past decade taught me that something can look as cool as ever and people still won't give it the time of day in the absence of familiarity. The sisters really didn't make this easier for themselves, not that they ever do, but I respect them all the more for doing what James Cameron pretty much did 6 years prior to their attempt, creating a world, only without what I see as his secret weapon and what I believe to be the key behind guaranteed box office dominion: melodramatic mastery. Tacked on or not, I say the romance stays, understanding it as a space operatic convention. I mean, are you even doing a space opera if the fate of the universe doesn't fall on two hot leads catching feelings for one another? Being carried bridal style by wolf ears while being told that you own the earth is like the whole point. But more impressive to me than visual flair is convincingly writing two people falling for each other, and I admit that having felt it from Lana and Lily back in 1996 left me a little confused at the chemical void between the girl next door and the space werewolf legionnaire. Depicting romance and intimacy as authentically and passionately as I recall from them might stem from an R rating, as are most of their movies, once carrying this viscerality not allowed under a PG rating. JA lacking in that Wachowski R-rated edge is fine because we're at least still subjected to the aesthetic transgression that granted the sisters their badges of visionaries. I'm talking about choosing to set your action set piece at pre-dawn light instead of the more conventional choice of broad daylight. It's giving Channing Tatum gliding boots leaving skater light trails instead of some generic jetpack. It's turning a bizarre and potentially lame idea into an aesthetic discovery. It's using The Wizard of Oz as a narrative template for your space operatic escapade. If not for that intent, I'd have a harder time getting behind choosing to deny Jupiter a character arc made static. Like Dorothy, she's still the same by the end of it all, despite having lived several seasons of Star Trek, segments of Brazil, a couple of Dune chapters, maybe with a side of John Carter and Zathura? I'm not even all that compelled by Jupiter Jones as a character, but turning her into Ripley wouldn't have been the patch either. I respect the desire to create a new Alice in a genre normally manhandled, here intentionally given a thoroughly feminine lens. Here we use diplomacy for problem solving. This guy had it coming, prancing around calling strangers mommy just because they look like they're object of Oedipal conquest even after clear disinterest. I digress, but more about that novel aesthetic flavor comprising of so many good choices made all together, best represented in that dogfight from texturing the frame with street lights reflecting over buildings like honey on a lens, contrasted against that saturated blue sky, occasionally disrupted by those cherry-colored explosions, to camera angles only these two geniuses paired with master cinematographer John Toll could have came up with. That love for their hometown jumping at the screen sort of made that first act my favorite, reminding me the most of their Matrix era with its unparalleled usage of skylines and urban grunge. Enchanting Chicago's landscape with its alien-infested alleyways was the perfect pretext to call on that neo-noir element we all fell for in '99, which the movie leaves behind by going to space. Not to devalue what the sisters had to offer in their visual interpretation of galactic aristocracy. Whether there has or hasn't been prior usages of Gothic art or Renaissance architecture for such settings, fuse that with George Holt's conceptual involvement, rechanneling that environmental and mechanical detailing given to Xion as to Jupiter in that uniquely George Holt flair, and it's a new aesthetic obsession. Not designing ships with the intent to make a good toy allows one to max out on the detailing without worrying about it being Lego friendly. Sacrificing a more iconic vehicular silhouette is made up by completing the most lavish frames ever composed in space opera cinema history. Would it be treason against my man Dennis, Holt's most recent competing muse, for feeling that he's at his best while working with the sisters? It's that coolness for coolness' sake that just caters to my kid brain. Sorry Dennis, I love you, but between ornithopters and zero ships, I'll take the laser gun wielding Gundam moths in a heartbeat. The Wachowski sisters and George Hall nurtured this aesthetic symbiosis for over a decade, displayed in shots motivated by specific flight patterns of vehicles seemingly designed with their eye for camera angles taken into account. There's a term for it, and it's God mode filmmaking. Rare are the directors whose camera quirks remain apparent even through virtual filmmaking, yet that Matrix Speed Racer blueprint is still there despite the major deviation in art direction and changes in DP partnerships. If not for Cloud Atlas's superior film look, or keeping Jupiter Ascending's initial color grade, I'd have a harder time deciding whether I prefer what Bill Pope or John Toll brought to Wachowski frames. If there's one thing for which I'd criticize the film's looks, it'd be draining the final grade of that electric blue sheen once matching the visual aggressivity of that other Wachowski trilogy. Respectfully, why? Those more pronounced blues were worth a thorough frame-by-frame investigation because I've been trying to figure out what I kept chasing in those trailers yanked from us in the final film. Deleting the Gatorade filter was a fumble, and whether it was John or the colorist, they lost me there. Should I even bring up the insane VFX changes across the marketing campaign? Personally, I would have preferred the blue palette for Belem's Refinery, but I guess that would have been at the expense of a more obvious Blade Runner visual callback. I can't even say that it's a case of style over substance, considering most of my gripes having to do with there not being enough time for the actual plot to play with its critique of mass consumerism and capitalism as is the Wachowski tradition, so it's left for the Flying Fortresses and Soylent Green reference to carry most of that conversation. Your arsenal being designed with beauty prioritized over efficiency conveys a message, and it's that buying that planet at its 3 moons was the smallest transaction you've done all week. But we're never given a visually dreadful exposure to that magnitude of exploitation. Not the aftermath, but the process, that infamous harvest so frequently mentioned. The horrors beyond my comprehension, show them to me. Planets getting stripped of their resources, left to be dead farms for skin moisturizer, overstretching the elite's lifespan. I do like that even in this intergalactic vastness of species, capitalism remains a systematically human-orchestrated aberration. It had to be a dude in a toupee. Millionaires, fictional or not, are a problem. A fundamentally human one. A notion I wish the actual plot hammered down a little harder. Villeneuve's Dune is the perfect example of plot and aesthetics complementing each other, not leaving the concept artists and production designers to do most of the talking. Being on the trending page of ArtStation for a couple of quick days isn't worth the flop. Never is, never will be. Condensing and reducing all those loaded themes and ideas to mere lines and not visualized by the story kind of reduced what could have been the Wachowski sisters' most provocative work to date to a polished aesthetic exercise. It's just a planet, Jupiter, said Khalik serenely. The Matrix was a masterclass of show and tell, and Speed Racer showed us the relationship between two brothers across time separated by death through usage of superimposition that has yet to be surpassed. Seeing Mila play both the parts of normal girl and space empress could have been a serve. Maybe her having dreams later revealed as glimpses into that past life could have allowed us to see that decadent family dynamic. Sounds like Dune? Just add that to the mashup. As if the Wachowski sisters weren't Dune heads or haven't been using dream visions as an opener or storytelling device. Imagine each entry in that theoretical trilogy opening with a dream, each showing an interaction with whatever Abrazax serving as the antagonist. Each dream more horrific than the last, synced with the trilogy's darkening tone from Khalik to Titus to Belem. Show us the sadness that led their mother to her untimely death before getting reincarnated into a Chicago-residing maid, a phenomenon fancily referred to as recurrence. It's that sort of detail that reveals the passion for sci-fi behind the camera stored in that funny brain of theirs. The same brain from which came a half-woman, half-floating golden chariot, peak Wachowski behavior. The film being driven as much by its characters as by its aesthetics might have helped its course, maybe even helping it be a worthy match against that neighboring space operatic franchise. Hence a trilogy not only to better spare some of those heavy themes, but also to better handle this TV series' quantity of characters, each fighting for that spotlight at the Met Gala. Duna Bay's moving tattoos are never given their deserved close-up due to her character mostly asked to fill some establishing shot whenever summoned by the plot. There is also no such thing as too much Duna Bay. Me being one of the 10 people obsessively grazing through that lookbook before the film's release, what I thought was another strange and concerningly revealing piece of marketing is probably half the reason behind me knowing and remembering names of characters, ships, or planets. Going through that fan wiki page still felt like taking a class for the first time, learning of words I've never read or heard before like Alcazar, apparently just a fancy term for palace. Khalik owns one on one of the many planets the plot sprints through before jumping onto the next lore-heavy vista. Imagine doing the cutest thing ever, calling your red planet Ceres, and not have a scene where Jupiter teaches Cain to use his splice-given tracking senses for more leisurely purposes rather than for the hunt, to smell the pretty flowers. The feminine energy I wish the movie leaned heavier on to further contrast with its more boyish components. But who's to say that spaceships aren't as much for girls? I was sold on the female space opera, and I wish it defeated Star Wars before it ultimately took care of that on its own, Ouroboros style. Broken record here, but more time spared for Jupiter Ascending's countless treasures could have helped that cult following be more than a couple of short-lived Tumblr communities. More time for us to savor every single piece of design. More time in that Wachowski brain to better study their autobiography of sci-fi influences, sonorized by Michael Giacchino at his absolute best. I had a head start obsessing over that score, already having absorbed segments of that commitment track used in that teaser. Give it a listen to it yourself because I'm not risking my channel for 20 likes. Go to the 5th minute and 8th second mark of that piece and then come back. You might nod due to an urge to finish the album while doing some house cleaning under musically induced cosmic mania. I thought his best work came from collaborating with Brad Bird until I was loudly corrected by enough memorable leitmotifs to spare for several franchises. That chorus arrangement is iconic to me, and it being left to be forgotten just as the flop for which it was composed is a crime I'll never forget. Glad that the Pacific Northwest ballot saw the value in it unlike the rest of the world, creating a number designed as an anthropomorphization of the birth of a planetary system, a dark and lonely place. Cool beans. Maybe recording your score prior to filming is the way. Whatever Lana and Lily whispered in Michael's ear changed my life, and the three likely to never partner up again might be one of the cruelest things about this being the likely end of that sisterly collaboration. A misunderstood masterpiece? That's debatable, but mostly running on literal fumes from seeing the aesthetic mastery across the Wachowski Sisters archive, once again left unsung, has been, if anything, a frustrating existence. Jupiter Ascending is anything but perfect, but the same thing happening to my brain seeing the floor warp around Neo before taking flight as to seeing Cain pressing on hovering buttons from the palm of his glove to activate his moon boots is of note. I was never the same since. The film just didn't connect for reasons I more or less agree with, Eddie Redmayne's performative spectrum not being one of them. I'll just say that Wachowski writing has seen better polishes, but why waste time rewording Filmento's thorough dissection when I could celebrate the qualities I'd hoped to see recycled elsewhere instead? I'd rather do something far more difficult nowadays, talking about the good things often taken for granted. I'm accepting the likely reality that the sisters won't take on another job gathering their usual talents, further solidifying my aesthetic taste by means of live-action anime. It's been 10 years since we got to witness their visceral yet balletic capturing of action, costume designer Kim Barrett not pulling any punches, further pushing trenchcoat propaganda and giving Channing Tatum the drippiest of fits in modern sci-fi cinema, George Hull making cool things as usual, all in the service of beauty and originality. Mainly, it's about keeping these two famous for aestheticizing the cosmos like no one ever did and perhaps never will, yet again quietly becoming another influence for later films to use and not as effectively. So spare some change and check that one out through whatever platform. Reserve your senses for the source of my praise. I say we try to get these two sweetheart geniuses another director's chair. Whether we'll ever see another Wachowski sisterly project of that scale again remains a mystery, but their offerings to the aesthetic landscape will never be forgotten. To aesthetics, to Lana and Lily, to ambition, to Jupiter.